Tensions along the Israel-Lebanon border have reached an all-time high.
Westfall, this has been an incredibly busy couple of weeks on the Israel-Lebanese border.
The conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, a terrorist group backed by Iran, has dangerously escalated once again.
Feels a need to retaliate. Hezbollah is its baby. Its leader is going to be, and possibly in order to save his own life.
Airstrikes, rockets crossing the border, and talks of a possible ground invasion have drawn the world's attention to this region, scarred by decades of hostility. Israel has already initiated limited ground incursions into southern Lebanon, targeting Hezbollah positions near the border. The aim of these operations is to dismantle the group's military infrastructure, which poses an immediate threat to nearby Israeli communities. These efforts are being supported by air and artillery strikes, with Israeli officials emphasizing that they have no plans for a prolonged occupation, as seen in past conflicts. But why has Israel found it necessary to invade Lebanon? And what role does Hezbollah play in this escalating violence? Today, we'll take a deep dive into the underlying factors driving this historic conflict. We'll explore how Hezbollah evolved into one of the world's most powerful non-state military forces, the challenges Israel faces in defending its citizens, and the broader risks this war presents to the region. We'll also look at how Iran's influence and the involvement of other international players could potentially turn this localized war into a much larger regional conflict. If you're looking to understand the forces behind this latest chapter in the Israel-Hezbollah struggle, and the potential global consequences of this crisis, stick with us until the end of this documentary. The answers are deeply intertwined with the complex web of power and influence that has shaped this region for centuries. Hezbollah is far from being just another armed group. It's a highly organized terrorist organization with immense military power and significant financial and logistical support, primarily from Iran. Often described as a state within a state, Hezbollah operates with a high level of independence in Lebanon, even challenging the Lebanese government itself. Its arsenal is formidable, boasting an estimated 150,000 rockets and missiles, ranging from short-range weapons to ballistic missiles capable of striking deep into Israel. This arsenal, largely supplied by Iran, gives Hezbollah a dangerous destructive capacity that goes beyond what would be expected of a non-state organization. Some of these missiles have a range that allows them to reach Tel Aviv and other major Israeli cities, putting the lives of millions of civilians at risk. In addition, the terrorist group has combat experience accumulated in the Syrian civil war, where its forces fought alongside the regime of Bashar al-Assad, training in urban combat and insurgency. Despite recent significant losses, such as the destruction of part of its communications infrastructure and the deaths of key leaders, Hezbollah remains determined to fire rockets at Israel. The group uses this strategy to maintain pressure on Israel, taking advantage of moments of vulnerability, such as the current conflict in Gaza, to divert Israeli attention and resources. And, contrary to what many might imagine, Hezbollah does not act merely as a local militia, but as one of the most powerful armed organizations in the world, rivaling even the Lebanese army in terms of firepower. With this enormous military force, Hezbollah positions itself as a constant threat to Israel's security, especially in the northern regions, and its actions have great influence on regional politics, attracting the attention not only of Israel, but of great powers such as the United States and Russia. Israel has faced hostilities since its creation in 1948, with several attacks from neighboring groups and countries over the decades. These aggressions have their roots in a variety of factors, such as territorial conflict and resistance to the presence of a Jewish nation in the historically Arab-inhabited region. However, anti-Jewish sentiment, which dates back to centuries of persecution of Jews in various parts of the world, also fuels tensions. Historical persecution of Jews, in Europe, particularly Germany during the Holocaust, and elsewhere in the world, contributed to the founding of Israel as a refuge. But since its creation, the country has faced significant political and military resistance from countries and groups that view the Jewish presence in Israel as illegitimate. It is important to remember that the context of the conflict is not exclusively religious, but involves territorial, political and security issues. The current situation, such as the conflict with Hezbollah and other groups, is often perceived as part of this resistance to the existence of Israel and the protection of the Jewish people living there. But it is clear that attacks on Israel because of the state's Jewish identity are also part of a broader scenario involving regional disputes and external influences. For this very dangerous reason, the conflict with Hezbollah has always been an existential security issue for Israel. With the constant threat of rocket attacks from Lebanon, the Israeli government finds itself facing a critical dilemma: how can it ensure the safety of its citizens without falling into a geopolitical trap that could strengthen its enemies? Since the outbreak of recent hostilities, Israel has had to evacuate some 60,000 civilians from towns along its northern border, areas that are under constant threat of rocket attacks. This evacuation is a drastic but necessary measure to protect the civilian population. However, the Israeli government expects this evacuation to be temporary, and the return of these families will only be possible if the threat from Hezbollah is completely neutralized. This puts Israel in a difficult position. The only way to ensure that Hezbollah stops firing rockets would be to eliminate the group's military presence in southern Lebanon. To do so, a large-scale ground operation, similar to the one that took place in 2006, may be unavoidable. An invasion of this scale would aim to drive Hezbollah from its positions near the border, destroy its missile arsenals and disrupt its military infrastructure. Israel is therefore preparing for what could be one of the riskiest military operations in its recent history. But a ground invasion brings with it a number of significant challenges and risks. First, there is the obvious danger of human losses, both of Israeli soldiers and Lebanese civilians. Fighting in mountainous and urban terrain, such as that found in southern Lebanon, is notoriously difficult and deadly. Hezbollah, experienced in guerrilla warfare and asymmetric warfare, knows the terrain well and has proven its resilience in previous conflicts, such as in 2006, when it inflicted considerable losses on the Israeli army. Furthermore, an invasion could backfire. By invading Lebanon, Israel risks reinforcing the narrative, particularly in the mainstream militant media, that Hezbollah is the country's main defender against Israeli aggression. This narrative is powerful among the Lebanese population, especially in times of destruction and civilian suffering. This could increase popular support for Hezbollah, rather than weaken the group. The image of Israel as an aggressor could also have international repercussions, negatively affecting its diplomacy and relations with other countries. Israel has so far pursued a strategy of precision airstrikes and tactical ambushes to weaken Hezbollah's military capabilities. Among its most recent actions, Israel has managed to compromise the group's communications infrastructure, including disrupting key networks used to coordinate its operations. In addition, some of Hezbollah's most important leaders were targeted during these operations, including Hassan al-Lakis, a key military strategist, Imad Mughniya, who played a crucial role in organizing Hezbollah forces, and most recently, Haj Abu Ali Jawad, who was responsible for operations in southern Lebanon. The loss of these leaders was a significant blow to Hezbollah terrorists, temporarily weakening their ability to respond in a coordinated manner. However, despite these losses, Hezbollah still maintains a substantial military force. The group is estimated to possess around 150,000 rockets and missiles, including long-range weapons capable of striking major population centers in Israel. Should the conflict continue to escalate, there is a possibility that Hezbollah could retaliate on a large scale, using its arsenal against major cities such as Tel Aviv and Haifa. Such retaliation would have a devastating impact, both in terms of civilian casualties and damage to Israeli infrastructure, forcing Israel to consider even more drastic responses. Another factor of great concern for Israel is the involvement of Iran, Hezbollah's main ally and sponsor. Iran provides strategic support, weapons and financial resources to the group, and has a direct interest in maintaining Hezbollah as a deterrent force in the region. Should Hezbollah be seriously weakened, Tehran may be forced to step up its support, either by sending more sophisticated weapons or through logistical support provided by pro-Iranian militias operating in countries such as Syria and Iraq. This could take the conflict to a new level, transforming a localized war into a wider and more dangerous confrontation. This escalation scenario would bring, in addition to military impacts, serious economic and diplomatic repercussions. The Middle East is a strategic region for global trade, especially with regard to oil, and any increase in hostilities could close crucial trade routes, such as the Strait of Hormuz, affecting international energy markets. The repercussions of this conflict could extend far beyond the border between Israel and Lebanon, influencing power dynamics throughout the Middle East and involving global powers that already have strategic interests in the region. In addition to potential problems with Iran, Israeli strikes could reopen an active front in Syria, which already serves as a transit point for Iranian weapons destined for Hezbollah. Israel has been conducting airstrikes in Syria to destroy Iranian weapons shipments and facilities, but a more intense war in Lebanon could increase the frequency and intensity of those strikes. This would not only widen the scope of the conflict, but also risk provoking a Syrian response or even interference from pro-Iran groups operating inside Syria, further increasing instability in the region. Another regional flashpoint would be Jordan, which shares a border with Israel and has historically been vulnerable to regional clashes. A prolonged conflict could force the Jordanian government, which is already facing economic and social challenges, to rethink its stance toward Israel, especially if there is popular pressure or destabilization on its borders. In addition to the countries directly involved, the conflict could complicate the fragile balance of Arab alliances in the Gulf. Even knowing the reality behind it all, if Israeli operations result in major destruction in Lebanon, especially in civilian areas, this could generate a wave of condemnation in the Arab world, forcing Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries, such as the United Arab Emirates, to adopt a more critical stance towards Israel, even though the country is the one most affected by all this. In the event of an escalating conflict, on the international stage, the United States, Israel's main ally, would likely provide military support, but at the same time seek to avoid deeper involvement that could compromise its own operations in the Middle East. Washington could use its influence to moderate Israel's actions and try to avoid a protracted war, offering logistical and weapons support, but pressing for a solution that avoids a complete collapse of Lebanon, since this would also open the door to more Iranian influence. In Europe, the situation could be much more complicated. Countries such as France and Germany, which traditionally support diplomatic solutions and already have a history of involvement in Lebanon, could oppose a prolonged conflict, especially if it causes large civilian casualties. This could increase Israel's diplomatic isolation in the European arena. The European Union, concerned about the stability of the Mediterranean and its economic and migration implications, could play an active role in trying to mediate the conflict or even impose sanctions if the situation worsens. Another important point is the potential global economic impact. The Middle East is a crucial region for oil and natural gas supplies, and a large-scale conflict involving Israel, Hezbollah, and possibly other regional actors such as Iran could destabilize global energy markets. A spike in oil prices due to insecure transport routes would have implications for economies around the world. What we now know is that after months of rising tension, the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah has reached a critical phase. What began as a series of sporadic clashes along Israel's northern border, with limited exchanges of fire, has escalated rapidly in recent weeks. While Israel and Hezbollah have sought to avoid a full-scale war, the intensification of attacks, especially after September 2024, has made it increasingly difficult to control the conflict. The current phase of the conflict is marked by a weakening of the command structure of the terrorist group Hezbollah, as a result of successful attacks by the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, on the group's communications networks. However, despite this damage, Hezbollah still has operational capabilities and maintains an asymmetric warfare strategy that relies less on centralized command and more on decentralized cells trained to act independently. A key factor contributing to the recent escalation has been the deteriorating situation in Gaza, which has placed Israel in a strategic dilemma. While attempting to neutralize threats to the south, Israel is facing increasing pressure from Hezbollah in the north. This second front generated by Hezbollah seeks to capitalize on Israel's divided attention, forcing it to allocate resources to two fronts simultaneously. For Israel, this situation exacerbates the risks, as it extends in multiple directions, increasing the pressure on its defenses. Furthermore, Hezbollah has been expanding its psychological operations, seeking to construct false narratives to mobilize Lebanese and international public opinion in its favor. With Lebanon already facing a severe economic and political crisis, the terrorist group seeks to present itself as the resistance force against the external enemy. This complicates Israel's stance, which, while focused on neutralizing military threats, faces the difficult task of dealing with Hezbollah's propaganda war, both in Lebanon and on the international stage. Another factor shaping the current stage of the conflict is Hezbollah's increasing use of drones and advanced technology. Israel has already managed to shoot down several drones deployed by the group, but the increasing technological sophistication of these devices presents a new challenge. Unlike in previous confrontations, in which rockets were Hezbollah's primary weapon, the use of drones, both for direct attacks and reconnaissance, is becoming a key part of the group's strategy, signaling a modernization of its arsenal. The international community has been pushing for a solution to avoid a full-scale war, with powers such as the United States supporting Israel but at the same time warning of the dangers of a prolonged ground intervention in southern Lebanon. Lebanon, already fragile internally, is on the brink of a new humanitarian crisis, with thousands of civilians displaced and essential infrastructure severely compromised, especially in areas close to the border. The escalation is also reshaping regional alliances. Saudi Arabia, as we said earlier, has been gradually moving closer to Israel due to economic and strategic interests and is closely monitoring developments. A prolonged conflict between Israel and Hezbollah could complicate this rapprochement, especially if Israeli military actions result in major destruction in Lebanon. With the inevitable escalation between Israel and Hezbollah, the situation is becoming increasingly delicate. As we have shown so far, a possible Israeli invasion of southern Lebanon could trigger serious regional and international repercussions. At the heart of this crisis, Israel faces a profound dilemma, protecting its citizens from constant rocket bombardment while trying to avoid a long-term spiral of conflict that could deepen its international isolation. Israel finds itself in an extremely vulnerable position. The growing threat on its northern border, combined with Hezbollah's use of asymmetric tactics, which hides among civilians and uses urban infrastructure to launch its attacks, puts the country in a complex situation. Despite its military superiority, Israel faces an adversary that knows how to exploit these irregular tactics and has the continued support of Iran, making the search for a definitive solution extremely difficult. With no clear diplomatic alternative in sight, an Israeli ground invasion of southern Lebanon seems increasingly likely. However, such an invasion, while it would disrupt Hezbollah's strike capability in the short term, would also have devastating consequences. The destruction of Lebanese infrastructure and increased civilian casualties could create a serious humanitarian crisis, which Hezbollah will certainly use to reinforce its resistance narrative and expand its support within Lebanon and the region. Even if Israel achieves tactical successes on the battlefield, the risk of strategic failure remains high. The use of force, however necessary to ensure the security of the Israeli population, could lead to diplomatic isolation, especially if there is an international perception that the operations cause disproportionate suffering to civilians. In such a scenario, Hezbollah, while militarily weakened, could emerge politically stronger, with renewed popular support. This asymmetric conflict places Israel at a challenging crossroads. While it is imperative that the country defend itself against direct and ongoing threats, it faces an enemy that uses dangerous and complex methods that involve both military warfare and political manipulation. A military response, even if effective in the short term, could have unpredictable long-term effects, perpetuating instability for both Israel and Lebanon. Ultimately, Israel appears trapped in a cycle of action and reaction. Any more forceful defensive measures could prolong the conflict and exacerbate regional tensions, weakening its international standing. The future of the Israel-Hezbollah conflict remains uncertain, balanced between immediate security needs and long-term strategic challenges. While a path to peace still seems distant, the risk of further escalation continues to loom over the region, creating a shadow of uncertainty that is unlikely to disappear anytime soon, and could affect not only the countries in the region, but the entire world. And to find out what will happen in the next chapters of this story, subscribe to the channel here and follow all our web docs.